It's Thursday, August 28th, and severe weather is making a return to the United States. And here it is, we have a marginal risk right here centered over the Red River and also extending into parts of northern Louisiana and southern Arkansas. And then we still do see those widespread thunderstorms likely expected to be across the west today. We will not really see as much monsoon conditions as we have seen the past couple of days, though, but there still will likely be a couple of stronger thunderstorms in the upper plains today. But this is really the first time that we've seen a marginal risk outlined in probably the past 2 or 3 days. And this is kind of bringing an end to that really calm pattern, which was really the calmest pattern that we've seen in months. But back to our main risk of severe weather today, there is going to be a very, very conditional chance of some hail. I think this is very small, and the hail would also really be small if we did see any, likely only being in that 1 to 1.5 inch in diameter range. And then for the wind risk, it's a bit larger and it spans our entire marginal risk area. And this is only for the conditional threat of some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds. And this risk is also conditional as well. But like the past couple of days, I actually don't think the largest threat from our storms today is going to be those severe characteristics, but I do think it will be the amount of rainfall we're expecting. We have a very, very large risk of not really in risk, but more in size. We do have a slight risk down here in parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and even back into parts of southern Missouri and Kansas. This would be for that conditional threat of 2 to potentially 5 inches of rainfall. Then we also could see the same thing back here in far eastern Colorado. Then both these will be surrounded by a marginal risk of severe weather, or one in the west being quite a bit larger. And in those marginal risks, it would only be for the conditional threat of 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. So not really as big of a flash flooding risk, but still something to stay weather aware of. And then we're still expecting to see some potentially record breaking cold temperatures for this time of the year. This day would be centered over Arkansas, potentially being in the feels like range of the low 60s. So if you're in Arkansas, you're going to love that. And then pretty much for everywhere that's not Texas, the Gulf Coast, or Florida, you'll still be seeing some pretty nice weather. Although it's going to start to warm up a little, it's still going to mostly be in that mid 70s range for all of you guys. But in Texas and Florida, it is going to be the warmest day in probably a week. Although it's still been warm, this is going to be a bit warmer than what we have been seeing. It's likely going to be in that high 90s to potentially even 100 feels like range, which is a bit unfortunate. And I know you're a bit jealous because the rest of the country is experiencing all this great weather. And the last thing we're going to look at before we take a more in-depth look at our severe weather today is going to be our National Hurricane Center outlook. And we can see that we still have really nothing expected to develop in the next week. So all good news there. And here's what the radar could look like later today. We could potentially see some severe storms pop off in the early afternoon with this big complex bringing a lot of steady rainfall, pretty much starting from Kansas, going down Oklahoma, really moving on in southeasterly track. And this is going to be brought by a bit of a spinning low pressure system. This is going to elongate out a bit as we go further into the day. A bit of a cold front situation happening here. Then this is just riding our jet stream down southeasterly. That's why we're seeing that. Then we're also going to see a bit of some interesting troughing activity down here as well. Those are going to be the main causers, but what this is going to bring is mostly just quite a bit of rain with that severe weather not really popping off until the early afternoon, like I said. And this is going to be pretty conditional because this will really stabilize out that environment substantially. And in front of this, we're also expecting a lot of cloud cover and just steady precipitation as well. So will we see severe weather with this? Not really super sure about that, but definitely be prepared for some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds and some small hail. Those winds are going to be more the issue, but the main issue with this is going to be the large amount of rainfall expected to be given to all of these areas, which this complex is going to traverse. And then interestingly, in front of this, there's going to be some very favorable shear, so potentially a small tornado threat, especially with a couple of these lone cells out here all the way down in southern Louisiana when that low level jet kicks in. Although I think that's going to be very conditional and pretty close to zero of seeing anything like that happen. And the second area to watch, just like the past couple of days, is going to be the upper plains convergence zone. We're still seeing enough storm ingredients for there to potentially be some strong storms out here. And then with that geography, we're really seeing our winds clash and converge, kind of forcing that air up and bringing those storms. And then here are 500 millibar winds, giving us a better look on why those storms are really popping up and where the forcing and organizing factors for those storms are coming from. And we can see that with our main cluster, which is kind of traversing this big area of our jet stream southeasterly, we will see a bit of a jet stream and vorticity maximum kind of associated with that, bringing that big messy cluster of thunderstorms potentially even being severe. We do still see a bit of a cyclone rotating up here in the northwest. This could bring some widespread thunderstorms to the region, not being severe though. And then another thing we'll notice is that we have a lot of westerly flow over our upper plains convergence zone. Another reason why we're likely to see some strong storms there today. But one thing that we'll notice is that this is actually the remnants of what was once Tropical Storm Juliet. And this is going to transform our weather pattern quite a bit in the next couple of days. We're going to go through today, and something we'll notice is that we're actually not going to see a lot of that monsoon weather we've been seeing the past couple of days, kind of in part to this. But as this kind of traverses that area with our trough and our jet stream, we're actually going to see a lot of severe weather tomorrow out here in the upper plains. Will it be strong? Not really super sure about that. It's kind of pointing towards not, but definitely a lot of thunderstorms out in the upper plains tomorrow. And then moving back to today, this is the storm environment in that main risk area. And something we'll notice is that we'll have sufficient CAPE, a extremely moist environment, 75 dew point, and our precipitable water is just going to be absurd, 2.18 inches. That is why there is that conditional threat of some flooding, and also potentially we could see some stronger downdrafts with this, and just a lot of really outflow dominant storms, bringing potentially those 60-mile-an-hour damaging gusts. Another thing I do want to point out is that we have a lot of organizing shear 40 knots. That's quite good. And then we're likely to see a more elongated area of some gusty wind stretching back into our line because the wind is kind of blowing right back into it. And we also see some wind veering also helping to organize our storms. And one thing we'll notice is that our shear is actually going to be quite good in front of this for tornadoes. Now, the reason why tornadoes aren't likely, even though we do have that low enough cloud base, is that the ground layer is just going to be so stable. And then those storms are likely going to be pretty much all outflow dominant. And then our shear vectors aren't really moving in the perfect direction to actually see any spin up thing like this. And also the storm mode is also expected to be very messy. So will we see a spin up tornado? It's definitely possible, but is it likely? Not at all. So that is something to stay weather aware of. But the main thing is just going to be so much rain. The most of all thing is going to be that potential risk of flooding and potentially some 60-mile-an-hour damaging gust.